What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode, which I'm honestly not totally even sure if I'm going to release a separate extended cut version of this week's episode because it's my daughter's first week of kindergarten. They're doing early release for the first 2 weeks of school. So somehow I have to cram my work week into like 3.5-hour work days. So I may have to cut some corners this week. It is what it is. But today we're going to dive into the topic of being misunderstood and kind of as a byproduct of that, not supported by our loved ones, our family members, those in our inner circle. I'm talking about family of origin family members. I'm talking about the people that you live under the same roof with or share your finances with, or just, friends and close circles in your life. A lot of folks don't understand what we do, and I think that is what leads folks to then sometimes inadvertently and sometimes overtly be unsupportive of our career choice. Now, to the credit of our loved ones, if they haven't directly benefited from an excellent therapeutic experience themselves, it's hard for them to know what it is that we do. Like there's so much kind of secrecy around what we do by definition due to confidentiality that most people don't really know what we do unless they're also a therapist or maybe if they've been through their own therapy themselves. So above and beyond the lingering stigma around mental health care that continues, I think this also lack of awareness of what therapy actually looks like is one of the contributing factors to those that care about us not really understanding what it is that we do and therefore being unsupportive. And as I say that out loud, I hear that phrasing of being unsupportive as sounding like a very active and intentional process. But I think in a lot of our relationships, the folks that love us and care for us are trying their best to be supportive, but the actions that they take in their misunderstandings of what we do end up effectively leaving us feeling unsupported. That was a little bit of a tongue twister. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, don't worry. We're going to get into it in this episode. It also seems worth noting that at least for a lot of us, myself included, we end up entering the profession because of a lot of dysfunction in our own family of origin. And so it would therefore make sense that our family of origin in particular might not really understand what it is that we do because it's kind of almost in opposition to some aspects of how we were raised. Sometimes, not always. Just sometimes, in my opinion. So whether you're hoping to become a therapist someday, or if you've been a therapist for a while now, all of us are definitely impacted when our loved ones aren't able to be supportive towards us. Obviously, it goes without saying, humans need to feel supported no matter what it is that we're doing with our lives, but also, in particular, our profession calls us to support others kind of by definition, and so we need somebody to support us in order to have the ability to support others to begin with. So for today, I thought we might as well dive into some of the ways that I've seen that loved ones and family members can be unsupportive, whether family of origin or the family that you're a part of now, or just the folks that you are most interconnected with at the moment, and talk about some ways that we can, improve that situation and get the support that we need. As I was reflecting on some of the more common ways that loved ones can tend to be unsupportive of our profession, I realized that a lot of them tend to be rooted in ways that our loved ones misunderstand something about what we do, or a lot of things about what we do. So as I run through this list of different ways that our loved ones might be unsupportive, you'll notice that they're all reflective of a different category of misunderstanding. And with that said, one of the common ways that we can be misunderstood by our loved ones and therefore not well supported is that our loved ones think we just listen to people talk all day long. We talked about this one in a video I made not too long ago about common misconceptions about therapists, and you'll see some overlaps between this episode and that episode as well, because our loved ones have some of these same misconceptions about us as well. Now, again, to the credit of our loved ones, if they haven't sat through their own positive therapeutic experience, then they're probably not going to really understand that what we do is so much more than just sitting and listening to people talk all day, even though, yes, we do listen to people talk all day. And so then what can happen is our loved ones, under the misconception that we have a pretty easy gig going on, can downplay the work that we do and not realize how much support that we need. Another way we can be misunderstood and unsupported is when our loved ones see how many therapy clients we see per week and interpret that as us working part-time. Of course, what full-time looks like can vary a lot depending on where you work, but also I would argue depending on your own kind of energy levels, sensitivities, abilities, etc. Nonetheless, with all of that said, I would make a clear argument that 20 client hours a week is working full time. If we think of a full-time work week as how many hours per week that you work, then maybe perhaps if you're in private practice and you're seeing 20 clients per week, you're not actually sitting at a desk or a therapy chair working for 40 hours of the week. But energetically, I can almost guarantee you that somebody seeing 20 therapy clients per week is probably spending a lot more energy day in and day out than somebody who's working a typical desk job for 40 hours a week or potentially even more than 40 hours a week. So then what can happen is our loved ones see that we're only seeing, 25 clients a week, 15 clients a week, 10 clients a week, whatever many clients a week that you're seeing. And if, let's say, we're complaining about our income, they might say, well, you're only working part-time. What did you expect? Or they might be worried about, household joint income and saying like, hey, you're not pulling your end of the bargain. Pick up the pace because you're only working part-time, and it can really just spiral to an unhelpful place very quickly. And similarly, a lot of our loved ones are very concerned about how little income we tend to earn on average as therapists. And it's true. On average, most therapists really don't get paid enough. So if you're sharing your finances with a loved one, or maybe you're expected to contribute to the pot of your family of origins finances or something like that, it might be a source of tension, and folks might point towards your career as the problem. Like, why did you choose this career when you don't earn enough? And that translates to a lack of support. And kind of a side point here is, unlike some professions that are also on average poorly paid, like say teachers, for example, in a lot of those professions where there's poor pay, the general public has some awareness and understanding that this is a systemic problem that's happening. But a lot of times folks have the idea that therapists on average actually earn a lot more money than we truly do earn on average. So that can be this sort of like expectations versus reality blindside moment. Like, let's say you're partnered together with somebody financially, and maybe you're in a very early part of your career, you're in grad school or, working towards licensure or something like that, and you sign up for a mortgage, assuming that your income is going to jump up to a certain number at some point in your relatively soon career. And then fast forward, come to find out that actually your income is way less than what you had planned for together. That can be incredibly disruptive to the relationship, to say the least. And of course, it could be really easy for a loved one to kind of point to the profession, blame systemic issues for that. But in a lot of cases, especially when there's a lot of fear or resentment and that sort of thing built up in the relationship, then the blame can be pointed on us. Somehow that we're not working hard enough, or we did this intentionally, or we don't care about the other person. I mean, we all know how these things can spiral to a much darker place. And building on some of the points we made already, because folks think we have such an easy job and maybe we're only working part-time, there's little or no empathy for us when we're having a tough day, or we're struggling, or we're dealing with burnout, you name it. If we're having a tough time with our career, sometimes we may not get that much empathy from our loved ones for it. Again, until you're sitting in the therapist chair day in and day out and feeling what it feels like to see our therapy clients, it's hard to empathize with the idea of like, yeah, you only saw 4 clients today, like must be nice. How can you be complaining about it when actually energetically we may have expended a lot more energy than our loved ones, or at least the same amount of energy as our loved ones who might be working something more like a desk job for 8 or 9 hours a day. I mean, I'm a therapist, so I can't say that I know what the experience is like of somebody working at a job other than a therapist job, but I will say it's not unusual for me to hear from loved ones or clients who aren't therapists and that sort of thing, like how much time you spend in like kind of mindless meetings in your day. That's not everybody. That's not at every job, but there certainly are a lot of jobs out there where it's stressful in its own way because you have to cram all your work around these sort of arguably useless meetings. However, when you're sitting in those meetings, your mind does not necessarily have to be engaged and focused in the same way. And so in that sense, your energy isn't being pulled in the same way, arguably, as when your on hours as a therapist are on. They are on. You can't miss a beat. Like, we don't get a free pass to zone out for 2 minutes in the middle of a therapy session, or, just like real quick, click over to another tab and check our email or respond real quick to a text message. By the way, if you are doing that or your therapist is doing that, that is a no-no. We should not be doing that. Our clients deserve our undivided full attention for that therapy hour, every single client, every single week. So yeah, it kind of pulls for a different kind of energy than maybe the average job. So I think a way to just kind of sum up a theme around the ways that our loved ones might misunderstand what we do and therefore become unsupportive is that because they can't really see what it's truly like to be in our shoes day in and day out, they can only really go off of these kind of very, very surface level numbers, like how many clients a week are we seeing, or how much income are we earning? And they might look at that and say, like, that doesn't look like much. You're not working that much and you're not earning that much. So what the heck are you doing? And I think for a lot of our loved ones, that might cause them to deter us from the career. If it's a loving, protective caregiver figure saying, like, why would you choose this career that, doesn't pay well? Or, if it's somebody we share a household with saying, like, hey, you seem tired and burned out and you're not even working that much and you're not even getting paid that much. Like, why don't you just switch careers? And though it is a very viable path to make changes to your careers, switch careers, perhaps there may even be some wisdom in that advice, at least sometimes. It may also be the case that we're in exactly the right place. This is the career path that we want to be on, even though, yes, it might be tiring at times. And maybe for a lot of us, it may not quite pay as much as the loved ones around us would prefer. And at least for some of us, our loved ones just blatantly don't understand what it is that we do at all. I mean, I relate. I remember many times my mom would ask me questions like, why would you want to talk to crazy people all day? And even more specifically, she'd say, like, you're sitting by yourself in a room with another person. Why would you put yourself in physical danger? These people could just hurt you, and on and on and on. Like, just vast misconceptions about what it is that I do. And I remember, like, once I got deeper into the career and my mom would ask these questions again, like, do you still like sitting and talking to crazy people all day? This is her language, not mine. I would say, like, I'm not sitting and talking to crazy people. Like, these are people where generally, if we met in a different context than the therapy room, we might very well be friends. And she just she just could not wrap her head around that. The stigma that she carried around mental health care ran so deep that her conception of who would call a therapist for help was so otherizing that she just couldn't step out of that viewpoint. So there was no way that I was ever going to receive anything that looked even a little bit like support from my mom for my career, because she just wasn't able to understand at all what it was that I do. And I think that can be true for a lot of us as well. There's cultural aspects behind that too. My mom's a first-gen immigrant from a culture that definitely stigmatizes mental health care more than U.S. culture on average. And I know that can kind of range all over the place, just kind of depending on your background. So if you're in this boat where your loved ones are not as supportive of your career as you'd like, here are some tools to consider to help make sure you get the support you need. One tip is, instead of emphasizing things like numbers, hours, pay, specifics about our day-to-day, instead to emphasize specifics around why we've chosen this career path or why we continue to believe it's worthwhile to stick with this career path. I think for a lot of our loved ones who genuinely want to offer their care and support for us, they see us just so tired or underpaid or whatever kind of list of hardships might be at play, and they might want to protect us from those. Say, like, this isn't working, it's not adding up. Why don't you quit, or why don't you pivot? And then, of course, for us, we can find that just so unsupportive because maybe we're not wanting to quit. So if we can help fill in the blanks for them and say, I get that this is a really hard career path that I've chosen, but I want to stick with this path for these reasons, or this is why this feels worthwhile to me, and all of that, and be specific about that. Then when you come home and say, I had a really tough day, rather than them reacting with like, you should quit, or like, yeah, that employer does not pay you enough, or whatever their kind of complaining type empathy they have for you, that they could instead say like, oh, I'm so sorry, like, how can I support you? Because they can at least get that you're not looking to bash or quit your job. You just need some empathy for maybe a tough moment in time, but you're still gonna, wake up and go to that job again the next day. I can empathize with this tool a bit from the other side of things, because there was a point where my husband, who's a physician, was in his years as a trainee. If you've ever been through it, or you have a loved one who's been through it, they are especially grueling training years for a physician. And I remember he'd come home, he would have worked, back-to-back overnight shifts, 80-hour weeks, fill in the blanks of like every single complaint you could think of. And I would just see this person that I cared for so much being just exhausted and worked into the ground and like making minimum wage. And I would see that and go like, we don't have to do this. Like, you don't have to do this. You can quit. It's okay. Like, I think it's a natural reaction to see our loved ones in that kind of hardship and say like, let's not do that anymore. And there is a time and a place for that. But there had to be a moment where, my husband came to me and said, hey, I think you're trying to be supportive when you do that, but actually I just need you to empathize and validate that like, today was a hard day at work, and not like screw this entire profession that I've spent at that point literally a decade of time working towards. Like, I'm doing this profession because, and then he filled in the blanks of just how valuable this career was to him, how passionate he was about continuing forward, and that sometimes it is worth making sacrifices or doing something hard if it's for the sake of something we really value. And that was so helpful for me to have that reframe of like, he's not looking for somebody to help him have permission to exit or bash the career. He just needs a shoulder to lean on when he's having a hard time. That's a helpful reference point for me, because in my own shoes, if I'm thinking like I'm complaining about my workday and my loved one says like, so why don't you quit? It just feels so misunderstanding, so unsupportive. But I definitely wore that hat in the reverse role. So if we think of it that way, then if we can offer our loved ones some more detail of like, this is why I'm choosing this path. Here's why this is important to me. And to ask them to hold on to that for you, so that when you're having a bad day or whatever the case may be, and you just need a shoulder to lean on, that they don't turn the narrative into something else and become, overprotective for you. And kind of in the same vein, especially when we have something more challenging or we need some kind of support from a loved one, rather than being specific about the details of the challenge, keep that part more general and instead be very specific about what support would look like for you right now. So for example, rather than saying like, I had such a long day, I had 2 intakes, and my couple therapy client yelled at me for the entire hour, and then I had this insurance claim denied, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, to say, I had a really long day, I'm so tired, you know what would help me right now? Can we just order takeout for dinner? And is it okay if I go to bed a little bit early today? That would just help me out so much, right? So be specific about the support that you need rather than the reasons why you're maybe needing some support, if that makes sense. And I get that even after all of this is said and done, our loved ones may not always be able to offer the kind of support that we need when it comes to like feeling supported in our career. And I do stand by my belief that all of us need at least some trusted therapists in our lives who like really get it because they're doing the same stuff that we're doing, to get some amount of support. Like, we can't get all of our support just from our circle of family members or those we're in the same household with. We really do need therapists in our lives who can see that part of our experience that really like no one else is ever going to quite get it. And unfortunately, there are going to be some cases where some of our loved ones may not be able to even remotely understand at all what it is that we're doing. And therefore, they might just not be able to offer any support. And so then support might look like setting healthy boundaries with those particular loved ones, as far as like maybe not letting them fully into that part of your life and finding other avenues where you can get that support from elsewhere. Well, thanks for hanging with me. I know the content of this episode is maybe a little bit heavier than my typical, but I hope you found it supportive. I know this is a sensitive topic, so only do this if you want to and it supports you, but feel free to add to the list that I shared today in the comments below of ways that either family might be not so supportive of your career, or any tips or tools you have to make sure you're still getting the support that you need so that others can glean from your wisdoms. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.